All right. Welcome to Words of the Wise. Today we have Chief Lewis from Redmond PD. Did I say that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start over. I
Okay.
wanted to make sure that I said everything correct. Do you want me to say your first name or is Chief Lewis good?
No, first name's great because I'd rather you just use my first name as we talk. I'll be more comfortable that way.
Okay. Do you want me to say your title or no?
That's fine. Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So we'll start over.
All right.
All right, welcome to Words of the Wise. I have Chief Devin Lewis here from Redmond PD. A little intro about him. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast here. Devin is really a pioneer of wellness. He's built two wellness programs at two different agencies. And we had a conversation before this, and it's really clear that wellness is a top priority for him. So I'm really excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, Paige. Great to be here.
Well, I want to kind of jump right in and ask you, like, what inspired you to pursue a career in law enforcement? How long have you been on the job? What was your inspiration? What got you into this line of work?
Yeah. So I've been in law enforcement for just over 25 years, and I think what inspired me most was my dad. My father was in law enforcement, so I grew up with my dad as a police officer, and then watched him become a patrol supervisor, and he was also on SWAT for majority of his career. So I kind of grew up around that. And I remember as a kid going out with him when he would have their SWAT qualifications, running through the physical fitness and the obstacle course. And they let me do that. And as a teenager, I thought it'd be really cool if I could beat some of them on that. And so it just kind of just got ingrained at an early age. And then when I went to college, I studied sociology and criminal justice at Washington State University. And as I learned more about just the job and the things that go into the job, I thought this is what I want to do, and I thought it'd be exciting and a way to help a lot of different people and meet a lot of different people, and so yeah, here we are.
And here we are. How long have you been in this career?
Yeah, great question. So 25 years in law enforcement. I actually started as a cadet when I was back in high school at 16. So if I counted that time, I guess it would be a little over 30 years total, but over 25 as like a sworn law enforcement officer in Oregon.
Wow, that's amazing. And can you tell me just some insight? Because I've had a lot of conversations with other, you know, individuals in leadership and, being in this career for as long as you have, how have you seen wellness evolve over that time? When you first started in your career, did you have wellness resources, or was that later in your career that you saw those types of resources being offered?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah, early on, there weren't a lot of wellness resources. I don't think wellness was even a word. Definitely
Yeah.
not a word in the law enforcement community when I started. Early on, the best example I had was my dad. And I would say definitely for the physical fitness aspect. I mean, he did 30 years and he was always very good about staying in top physical fitness, physical shape. And when I started early on, he said, make sure, he definitely said, make sure you do that. But then he added on, make sure you focus on your family and make sure that you have, friends and life outside of law enforcement because, he said this can be a long, difficult career. And if you don't kind of have those dueling perspectives, that kind of secondary perspective from friends and family outside of law enforcement, you might start to see the world through a jaded eye. So that was kind of what I had early on. But yeah, those first 2 years, working at the local sheriff's office here, and yeah, there was a lot of people that I would say, they weren't physically fit, and it's hard to know about how they were doing mentally because we didn't really talk about that back then. So it
Right.
was definitely not a thing 25 years ago.
And do you think that his words of wisdom that he gave to you early in your career were ones that really stuck with you and helped to create that longevity, on the job?
Yeah, I think I definitely it definitely played a big role in it. One of the other things he told me was, you know, that it's a difficult job, and so it's something you have to be passionate about. If you're not passionate about law enforcement, you shouldn't do it. It's not something you
Mm.
just do for the paycheck, for the benefits. To be successful, his advice was you really have to be passionate about it. And fortunately, a couple of years into the job, I realized I really was passionate about it. I loved it, and I had a feeling I'd stick with it through my whole career. Early on, I didn't know where that career was going to lead me, but I definitely knew that it was something I wanted to do, for the next 25, 30, 35 years for sure.
And was that for your own personal wellness, or was that what really set the trajectory for you setting up organizational wellness?
early on, it was just, I think it was just for myself. And then, 5 years into my career, I lateraled over to Bend Police Department here in Central Oregon. And Bend was a pretty progressive agency. And there's a bunch of us working at Bend that kind of really started to realize we had a commonality, and that was wellness. And
Mm.
initially, that commonality was a physical fitness element, a lot of workouts together. A few of us were on the SWAT team together. So a lot of that kind of camaraderie. But as we started to talk, we realized, that we also were interested in things outside of physical fitness. Some of us were seeing a counselor. Some of us were participating in yoga. Some of us were participating in some other maybe what we consider alternative methods back then, but now are more mainstream, like different mindfulness exercises, MBSR, EMDR, stuff like that.
And do you think, because I think that's a really interesting point, because it sounds like, and and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the conversations I have with agencies, it seems like that locker room type of talk, at least for a lot of agencies, is totally opposite to what you just said. It's like, oh, I wouldn't do that, or like, I wouldn't see a therapist, or I wouldn't do those things. But it seems like with you and the agency that you were with previously, that that conversation was that of wellness and sharing what you guys were doing and things that have helped you. How do you think that those conversations started, and how do you think, agencies can create a culture where people are comfortable talking about the different resources that they're using in wellness?
Yeah. Try to unravel that question a little bit. I think a first part, I think those locker room conversations, maybe used to be different. But again, there was a group of us that had that commonality. And then I think we just started to talk about it as a group. And then, we weren't necessarily all on the same patrol team. A lot of us had a variety of assignments. So we would talk about it, amongst ourselves, and we'd talk about it with other people throughout the department. And what we started to realize is, maybe not all aspects of wellness back then, but, you could find buy-in with bits and pieces. Maybe somebody was really into physical fitness. Maybe somebody wasn't super into physical fitness, but they really liked, they really liked meditation, or they really liked yoga. Or maybe they already did that on their own time. And so, that you could find the buy-in there. Maybe you found somebody who had, they've already had been through maybe traumas in their personal life. So they'd already had the experience of seeing, a therapist or a counselor or somebody to help them get through those tough times. So you could find the buy-in there. And so I think as we started to talk about it, we realized, hey, we might not all have the same experience with wellness, but we all kind of have a shared interest. And I think with that, we were able to generate a lot of synergy amongst that group. And as we brought it forward, initially, at least at Bend, we started to look at all these different avenues that we could try to pursue wellness. And I think it just kind of picked up momentum. And eventually, when you have a majority, I would say, a majority of the department that at least maybe hadn't all experienced it, but were open to the idea of it, then and that's when you're able to start making some of those small incremental changes. So for us, that's kind of how it happened.
And I love that you said the word buy-in, because I think that that's one of the number one conversations, is like, how do we get buy-in? How do you create that culture? And it seems to me that you started with organic conversations that kind of trickled through the agency, and that was how you got the buy-in, is through having these, having the conversations at the forefront and making it less stigmatized. And then you were able to then implement other wellness resources that people bought into, and kind of gravitated towards. Is that correct? Am I kind of understanding that? Okay.
That's a good summary for sure.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of how it worked. And I do remember we went to a training. A few of us went to a training. I guess there were four of us, and we're all pretty passionate about it. I want to say maybe 2013 or 20, probably around there. But we went to this training, and at this training, there's somebody that was talking about, wellness in law enforcement. I wish I could remember who it was, but they were highlighting studies of special forces and special operations teams, like the Navy SEALs and the Green Berets, and how they were using, mindfulness and meditation and, MBSR and these other practices to help after very stressful events, to kind of help reset their nervous system, kind of reset their bodies, reset their mental health. And that they were using those all the time. And a few of us kind of recognized, if it's good enough for them, well, then, it should be good enough for us. And so we really started to explore that as well. And it wasn't just myself. Like I said, we had a great team at Bend, and there's a lot of outreach. We talked with lots of different departments, lots of different specialists. And one of the first things we did was we brought in um, we were able to have physical fitness and get on duty workouts very early on. So that was just big to be able to have on duty
Mhm.
workouts. That was great. But one of the very early things we did was we got the Headspace app, and we were able to get a login for the entire department and put it on everybody's phone. And then a lot of us on our teams at the end of the shift, we would just try to bring everybody together and do a 5 or 10 minute Headspace. And people, these are people, a lot of us, and I wasn't an expert by any means either, but hadn't done a lot of meditation or mindfulness, but just that early on. And sure, there is some snickering in the beginning, right? When you've got your eyes closed and, you've got Andy on Headspace talking with his accent, but eventually people were able to recognize like, hey, if I just, breathing and relaxing and being able to do that at the end of a shift, it was amazing. You would leave your shift and you're able to come home and be in a totally different frame of mind, much more available to be, a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend, whatever that may be. So, that was kind of the early on things we did, but I think it was successful and that helped us, again, get that buy-in that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, and there's so many things going on in my head right now, and I think one is the way you presented it to your team is like this is for elite performance. If it's
Yes.
good enough for, like you said, Navy SEALs and these really high level performing individuals, then it's for us too. And so presenting it in a way where it's like this is a tool for our performance, and then beyond that, recognizing that your career is just one piece of you. It's not the full picture. You have a home life and a family life and friends, and you have this other piece of the puzzle that's so, so important. And utilizing those tools, not just for the performance on the job, but then how can you down regulate yourself so that you can be present and less stressed for all the other aspects of your life. So I love that you talked about that as well, because it's like how do you bridge that gap? How can you on one end of it shift from home life to work life and make sure that you're physically and mentally prepared for what the career demands of you, but then on the other side, how can you disconnect from the job and prepare yourself so that you can be the best version of yourself for your friends and your family. So it sounds like that's something that you guys focused on at your previous agency, and it seemed to be very successful. So I love that you mentioned that part of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and that was definitely a big driving force behind it is, we had, all of us had been in the career long enough that we had all seen some people whose careers had ended not the way they wanted to, not with a retiring in good standing or a good retirement, but maybe making some mistake, right? Whether that's, maybe it was an addiction or maybe it was something else. And it's not that they weren't responsible for their choices, but if they had had a better understanding, maybe of how to handle that stress or how to have a better work-life balance, right? Maybe things would have been different. And so that was kind of another motivating factor for all of us. And I will say again, and you know, to get through this career, you definitely, I think it's important to have a very supportive family, and I've been very, very blessed to have, um, you know, I have a great wife and a great family, and they've been very supportive. And there were times, and they would tell you, and I would tell you too, there were times in my career where I didn't have a great work-life balance. And I look back at those times, and I'm very fortunate that they were so supportive and able to stand by me through those times because, yeah, I definitely wasn't practicing these things back then. And and even practicing them now, still always not perfect, right? But again, trying to focus on that idea of a work-life balance. And you know this is such, so many of us who do this job are so proud of what we do, but it's trying to find that balance of not letting the identity of a police officer consume who we are, right? Again, it's just
Mhm.
something that we do, it's not who we are. But I think that can be difficult sometimes, and sometimes people lose that. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that, we're human beings first. We're spouses, mothers, fathers, husbands, wives, sisters, brothers, friends. Those are who we are first. This is just something we do. And we can be proud of it. But again, trying to find that balance. And I think that was a big motivating factor for that group of us back at Bend that really kind of started to push this idea of wellness and bring it to the department.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who is listening to this, who is in leadership or who's trying to build out a wellness program, what are some words of advice that you would have for them? Like, obviously you can kind of go over some of the different elements of wellness that you found to be really impactful and successful. I like to call it the buffet. So
Yeah,
there's like all
right.
the different options that you can kind of sample and try. But um, beyond, the types of resources, how do you know what to add? Um, how do you know, how long it's going to take for it to get off the ground? And, continuing to ride that wave of momentum. What are some words of advice you might have for someone else who's, maybe in the infancy stage of putting together a wellness program and things that you found to be successful when you are piecing together yours?
I think the biggest one, which is ironic that I would say this because I'm not the most patient person, but patience is a big one. I mean, I look at what we're trying to do, what we're trying to build at Redmond right now, and we're trying to build a wellness program from the ground up. And I'm trying to do a lot of the lessons that we learned at Ben, bringing them here to Redmond. And I think patience is a big one. And I think first and foremost, it's just trying to figure out, talking to people within your department and trying to figure out what kind of things do they want. And
Mhm.
maybe initially you're not going to get a lot of responses back, and that's okay. But even the few responses you do get back, kind of focus on those, because even if only 20% of your department appears interested in wellness, well, then focus on what those 20% want. And again, I think one of the easiest ones to do is that physical fitness aspect, because that's
Mhm.
already part of our job. Um, and a lot of departments, not everyone, but a lot of departments, they have some sort of facility or some sort of program built in where you either have a gym on site or you've got benefits to where you can join a gym at a reduced rate or something. So physical fitness to me is kind of an easy one. And then I think you trying to just build out from there, that buffet like you talked about, and trying to find out what else are people interested in. Maybe you already have a peer support program. Well, peer support to me, that's part of wellness. That's a big thing. So trying to build that up.
100%.
Or maybe you have a chaplaincy program. That's part of wellness. Build that up. And then maybe move on to trying to find other resources out there, whether it's bringing in like we brought in the mindful badge, Rich Gorling, and he's a retired police officer out of Hillsboro, Oregon, but he does a great job. He's got his master's degree. He does a great job teaching mindfulness. We brought him to Redmond on two different occasions. First to teach the command staff and supervisors kind of mindfulness and all the mindfulness exercises so we could do it. And then we brought it in to all the line level staff and everybody else. And it's funny, I felt bad about doing that. I wanted to bring it into the line level staff first, but in talking around, there wasn't a lot of buy-in initially. And so it's kind of like, well, we were going to take on the challenge and show them as supervisors and as leaders in the department that this is something we were interested in. This is something we believed in it would work. And after doing that, then we were able to kind of show that it worked and then bring that to the rest of the department. And again, I think trying to focus on small successes, you're not going to, even now, even at Bend, like we didn't have 100% participation in Bend. Redmond, we're still trying to grow our wellness program here. There's not 100% participation, but focusing on the people that are participating, and then trying to find, what are the barriers. One of the story comes to my head thinking about Bend. We had a person at Bend. He's a great guy. He was one of our sergeants. And we brought yoga to Bend, and we had on duty yoga, which is pretty epic. And
I
a
love
lot of
that.
pushback initially, but by the end, we had a lot of people that were engaging in it, and they were reporting better flexibility, reduced pain, better sleep, all those things that come with that. We had one of our individuals, and he just refused to do it because in his mind, he was a very devout Christian, and he felt that yoga was like anti-Christian. And so
Mhm.
we talked about that at length, and he wouldn't come off that. But when we would do our mindfulness exercises, we talked about prayer, and I remember talking to him. I said, "Well, what's prayer?" And we kind of talked about it, and he kind of got the understanding prayer is kind of like meditation. So I offered to him, well, at the end of the day, if we're doing our meditation or mindfulness exercise, even if it's an unguided one, pray, do your own prayer. Like for him, that was for him how he would get wellness.
Mhm.
And so again, without trying to alienate anybody, but trying to incorporate again that buffet, different facets, so you can hopefully increase that participation. And I think it's, again, going back to your question, patience, just taking the time and recognizing that maybe not one person is going to do all facets of a wellness program, but if you can have a diversified approach, then maybe every person will do one part. And then that's, I think, how you're going to increase participation.
100%. And there again, there's so many things going on in my head because I'm like shaking my head. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Um, I think that the idea that 100% of people are going to do one singular thing is unrealistic. And so, like we said, having lots of different options that everyone can choose from. But what I heard when you were talking is that you're meeting people where they are. And I think that's so important to say, hey, like maybe you're not into yoga, but maybe you're into mindfulness. And I also think that one of the things you said was starting with the physical. I think that that's a really good strategy too, because I think that especially when there's a little bit of pushback or something is a little bit more stigmatized or there's like, kind of some resistance to an idea. Usually it's stuff that's a little bit more like woo. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah.
starting with the physical of like, because I guarantee if you go into a room full of cops and you say, who wants their low back to feel better? Everyone's going to raise their hand and be like me. So if
100%.
you can start there and meet people where they are and focus on things that are important to them, then I think all of those other things happen organically. I don't think you have to push for it. It's like, okay, I feel better doing this and the PD is offering this. Well, what else is the PD offering? Maybe I would also be open and interested in doing something else. And I think that like those things start to progress. And I really like that strategy of like meet people where they are, and if all else fails, start with the physical because everyone wants to, feel physically better and then also want to be able to, perform the functions of their career, effectively and efficiently. So, um, would you say, for leadership, would you, if someone's building a wellness program right now, what would be the number one thing? Like if you had to pick one thing that you've done that you're like, this was the most important or the most impactful thing for us to do starting, what do you think that would be? Aside from, and obviously we know like EAP and peer support and
Hmm.
chaplaincy, and those are a part of it. But if there was one thing that's maybe a little bit outside of the norm, if you're like, this is one thing I would highly recommend because I saw a huge impact in my team.
Yeah. So what I'm going to pick is actually, it's probably difficult and not difficult. It's just, it's one that has comes with a little bit of a cost. And so I recognize that, for departments, I know it can be for some departments to prioritize wellness. That can be difficult with budgets and things like that. But
Mhm.
at least here at Redmond, one of the things we get the most participation in is we brought in a group called Sigma Tactical, and they do cardiac screenings and blood work.
Mm.
And so we brought that in. It was a cost, but we offer that to everybody at the department, and not everybody participated, but over 90%. And the
Wow.
reason why I say that was so beneficial is because part of that was a blood screen, part of that was a VO2 max, part of that was a cardiac screening where they used, they looked at your carotid arteries on your neck to determine, if you had a certain type of plaque buildup. And you also got a complete, at the end of it, you not only did you get all your results, but you met with a nutritionist who would give you a full workout or workup of your blood work and then give you a list of nutrition, dietary, and natural supplements, as well as like an exercise program to best benefit you. And so to me, that was kind of because we had such a high participation in that, I felt like that was one of the greatest things we've done. And at least it gave everybody the tools. Because you know how
Right.
it is. If you don't know something, we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. But once you educate a person and you give them the knowledge, so once somebody has that report and they're looking at it and they can see what they can do to be healthier, then they have to make the conscious choice to not be healthier, to not
Yeah.
do the exercise, to not eat better, to not take that supplement, right? They're having to make a conscious choice to not do those things. And that's difficult. Once you know, it's very
Yep.
difficult to not do something, right? And so I think that was, to answer your question, that was probably for us, at least here at Redmond, that was the single biggest thing that I've seen the best results. Um, and again, there's a lot. I mean, and again, if you don't have the money, I would say one of the other things is just, prioritizing. Like I said, if you can do it, prioritizing some sort of on duty whatever it is, on duty physical fitness, um, you know, an on duty meditation and wellness app that only takes 5 to 15 minutes a day, right? And so I think whatever it is that you can do, whatever your department can do, I think just do something. It's
Hmm.
taking that first step sometimes, and it can be a little bit scary, but just making that first step. And I think once you do that first step, again, you're not going to maybe get buy-in from everybody, but you're going to get buy-in from some, and then that's where you start to, you go from there. Okay, find those early adopters. Okay, now what do those people want to see, and then just kind of start to build the program from there.
Yeah, and I've heard you say this a couple times, and I'm so on board with this, and this is something that I talk about all the time, but small things can make a huge impact. It's and this is one of the things when people ask me like, how often should I do something, or how long should I do something for? And I am always like, just do it. Something's better than nothing. You can
Right.
always progress from there. But I really like that you said that because it's true. I think that sometimes you are almost afraid to start. And so then you don't do anything at all. But it's like if you can do 5 minutes or 10 minutes of something once a week, once a month, it's
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
than nothing at all. And just not allowing the fear of like something not being successful keep you from trying. Whether
Yeah.
that's an individual or an organization, it's like I think that there is a certain level of trial and error to see what is successful and what isn't. But I've heard really, really good things about those screenings from a lot of different agencies. So I think that that's great advice. Um, Awesome. Well, so I know we talked about this before, but one, I want to kind of give you the floor and anything else that we missed that you want to share. But I also wanted to kind of circle back because the reason why I created this podcast in the first place is so that we can, share advice and inspire not just leadership, but we also want to inspire the the younger and the up and coming generation when it comes to wellness. And the more we can have conversations like this, I think the more, and it kind of circles back to how you started in the first place, is having these conversations, finding that solidarity and that community, and then from there change starts to happen and proactiveness starts to happen. And I don't know if you've seen this, and you can totally correct me if you have never seen this before, but from what I'm seeing is that there's an interesting dynamic because there's this older generation who didn't really have resources earlier in their career, like you had mentioned earlier. And I've had endless conversations where, leadership will say, I wish I would have had this. And if I would have had this, then maybe it would have XYZ. And it's been across the board. It's like if I had this, maybe it would have saved my marriage, or maybe I wouldn't have 3 shoulder surgeries, or maybe I wouldn't have had, some sort of mental breakdown or burnout. Um, and then we have the younger, newer generation that is kind of growing up with these resources established in one capacity or another. And I think that in one perspective, it's more normal, and they almost kind of want it and expect it from an agency. But then on the flip side to that, we have this dynamic where when you're younger, you kind of feel like you're invincible a little bit. And so you don't necessarily proactively prioritize your wellness because it's like, oh, I have time. And so I'm seeing this kind of internally of like this kind of current and older generation that's like, man, I wish I would have had this. This newer that's like, yeah, I want it, but I also don't feel like I need it right now because like I feel good physically, I'm not hurt yet. And I think that it is human nature to kind of not deal with something until there's a problem, so we don't really, and I'm not speaking, to everyone, but in general, we don't really think about injuries until we're injured. And then we're like, oh no, now we have to recover from this, or we don't think about being sick until we're sick. So I would love to hear your insight and any advice that you would give to the younger, the up and coming generation, when it comes to wellness. Like, what is one thing that maybe you wish that you would have known if you could tell your younger self starting in the career to do, or a piece of advice that you would give to the next generation for wellness?
Yeah. I think you bring up a good point, and I think it is one of those things where when you're young, you do think you're invincible, and a lot of times you are. It seems like you are, right? Maybe
Hmm.
you don't have, a lot of our, younger officers and staff members. They're still healthy, which is great. Maybe they're newly married, or maybe they're not married, maybe they don't have a family yet, so they're pretty independent, and so they have a lot of time to just, focus on everything else. And so I think that's true, but I think it's trying to let them know, trying to teach them a little bit of kind of learning from our mistakes and recognizing that, when we started, we didn't have these resources, and we have these resources for a reason because if you look back, there's a lot of people that came before you that unfortunately didn't make it to retirement for a variety of reasons. And what we're trying to do is trying to make it so you can make it to retirement. Or what I tell people all the time is, I get it's a different generation now. Maybe you're only going to do this job for 10 years and you're going to try to do something else. That's all right. But while you're here for 10 years, I want to have the best version of you for the 10 years you're here. You know what I mean? I want you to be the healthiest. I don't want you to just be surviving law enforcement. I want you to thrive in law enforcement. And so I would just tell them that all these different resources we're providing you, you might feel like you don't, it might feel like you don't need them right now. Um, but if you start doing these practices now, they're going to carry you into the future, right? And so I think that's what I would really try to push. And again, that's where that variety comes in. Not to go off on a little bit of a tangent, but you
Please do.
just to kind of brag of a little bit on what we're trying to build at Redmond is, just in the 5 years that I've been here, I've seen like our team has done some great work. I mentioned Stigma Tactical, and I mentioned, bringing in the mindful badge for the mindfulness training. But our record staff, right? Records, they're the most important part of a police department. They're the
Mhm.
heartbeat. They process all of our paperwork. They handle all the phones, all the public records requests, right? They're working the front windows. They are the unsung heroes. Well, they're at their desks all the time. Maybe they can't always get that on duty workout. Maybe they can't break away for the gym or whatever. So what we were able to then was we provided all of them walking treadmills. They all have stand up desks. So at least,
Amazing.
during the day, they can do the walking treadmill and do their work. That's with if they want to. We've tried to provide everybody the opportunity to have an Aura ring or some other sort of wearable fitness tracker because it's so important. Sleep is all of our superpower. Going back to actually, I just got to my answer. I would tell every person that starts this career, prioritize sleep.
A hundred
Because when we're
percent.
young, none of us do. We're okay to work the shift work. We're always going to work the overtime shift. We'll stay late
Mhm.
um, because we feel invincible. So we will. There's plenty of times I would go 24, 36 hours without sleep. And I thought, oh, that's great. Well, that wasn't great, but you don't know that at the time, right? Because you are young, so you're doing those things. So I think now that we're talking about it, prioritizing sleep is probably the number one factor. We're learning all this information is coming out about how important sleep is. It's amazing. It's connected to so many things that our body does and how well we feel, or how, even like how sick we may get, or some diseases that we could get,
Yep.
or how fast we heal. So I would say prioritize sleep to go back to your question. But yeah, and again, just trying to always find different things that people can do. When I first started here, we had a physical fitness incentive. If you would pass the ORPAT, which is a special thing to Oregon, it's like our physical fitness standard in Oregon. You would get $75 a month essentially if you could do that twice a year. Well, in the last contract negotiations, we worked with our police association because we really wanted to get mental health incentivized. Because even though we talk about it, and a bunch of us here in Redmond, we're very open that we've seen counselors and we've seen therapists and mental health professionals. We want to try to incentivize people to, even if you just go once a year, maybe you'll go once a year for 4 years and never talk about anything, but maybe 50 years, something's going to happen, right? That one time, like you talked about earlier, just doing something just once. So we changed our incentive. We increased it to $110 a month. And so for the first 6 months, if you do ORPAT, you get that. But then for the second 6 months of the year, if you just go and have a 1 hour check in with any sort of counselor, licensed therapist, mental health behavior specialist, whatever it is, social worker, we don't need to see anything other than just a signed form. Obviously, all the information you talk about or don't talk about is all protected. We don't want that. We just want the form that you did it.
Mhm.
And then you'll get that incentive. And as far as I know, we're one of the only places that I know of, at least I think maybe the only one in Oregon that does this. But again, it's just that idea of, if we incentivize it, right now we only have about 20 to 25% of the department that did the ORPAT physical fitness incentive. Well, I'm trying to find something that maybe a majority of the department will do. And maybe we won't. Maybe we'll only get 20 or 25% of the people that do the wellness, the wellness check-in. But if that's a different 20 to 25%, we just doubled our participation, with that wellness incentive. And I
100%.
truly believe if you start talking to somebody, if you can find the right person, if you've been in this career long enough, we've all experienced, trauma, and some of us experience better than others. I understand that, but maybe, we all have that one call we think about. And if you could find somebody just to be able to talk about that and, be able to offload that and, heal it so it doesn't come back, that's only going to help your future. And so I think, that's just, again, not to toot our own horn, but I'm really proud about that we were able to work with our association and get that in. And I'm really hoping, this is we're going into the first year of this happening. So I'm really curious to see the numbers of how many people participate in that. And hopefully it grows in the future as it becomes, kind of a more, I don't want to say accepted, but maybe more of a cultural norm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I completely agree with everything you say. I'm like sitting here just like nodding my head. So I want to ask you one last question. And I know that in the beginning you kind of gave your why starting in this career. And I talked to a lot of different individuals within law enforcement, and I always talk about knowing your why. And I think that it's so important when it comes to wellness, and this could be from an organizational perspective, with leadership, or it can, come from an individual perspective, but knowing why wellness is important to you. And I think for everyone, it's going to be different. And it's kind of touches back to what we talked about before about meeting people where they are. And I find that, again, it's human nature, but I think especially in law enforcement, if you tell someone to do something, it's kind of know or why, in the beginning stages at least. And so I kind of teach, know your why. Why is wellness important to you? Why is proactively, um, you know, prioritizing your wellness important to you? And that could be anything, that could be performance on the job, that could be your family, whatever it is, knowing your why and then allowing that to be your motivation to push forward, whether that's pushing new programs forward, or, getting up and doing the thing that maybe you're not as excited to do, or maybe you feel like you don't have enough time to do. And so right now in this time in your career, what is your why? Why is it important for you to prioritize your department's wellness, but also your personal wellness?
For sure. And I love how you asked that question about why is it important right now at this time in my life? And I think that's important because I think people sometimes they get locked into a why. And I think our whys for a lot of things we do evolve and change over time.
Mhm.
So I would tell you early on, my why was definitely performance based. I wanted to be the best officer I could be. I never wanted to lose a foot pursuit, a fight. I wanted to be the fastest person when we did our SWAT calls, very performance driven. Um, but as I went through my career, and really started to get experience, and I started to have a family, and my kids started to get older, it became my family. And I would tell you right now, that's my why for everything, but especially wellness. Um, yeah, my wife and I, we've been together since, we met in college. We've been married for, over 23 years now. And I want to stay healthy, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually, you know, for her and for my kids, not just for myself, because I want to continue to be blessed with this amazing family that I have. And even, our kids are now in college, but, I want to be able to continue to be able to go visit them and interact with them and be, and as we move on to this next stage of, our marriage too, I want to be able to be there for her. And I really want to just have a happy family. And then when I go into retirement, I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive. I look forward to the future when I'll be a grandparent someday, right? I want to be able to interact with my grandkids. And I've seen so many, officers that finish this career and they retire and shortly thereafter, you know, if they don't die, they have some medical event where they can't do those things that they used to do. And I don't want that to happen to me again. I want to be able to be a big part of my family's life, not just now, but for the next 40 or 50 years, hopefully. So that's definitely my why.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate your time so much and you sharing all of your insight and your knowledge. And you're doing great things out there and, for your department. And so thank you for coming on and sharing that with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Paige. Thanks for the invite. And I just want to say you're doing amazing things too. I mean, every time I see your website and just what you're doing down in Arizona, I love that they've incorporated your program into their posts. And hopefully that continues to grow. And yeah, I would love to be able to see that program, start to go across the country because I know we could definitely use that kind of stuff here in Oregon as well,
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
for sure.
I'm just going to stop the recording now.